In this video, I'd like to talk about interdependence and food webs, parasites and mutualists, pollution, as well as finally talking about pollution indicators. After this video, it will leave one more video where we need to look at the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, but we'll leave that for a separate video in total. Okay. Now, when we're looking at food webs, you need to understand this idea of interdependency. So, interdependent. Now, interdependent literally means that all organisms in an ecosystem rely on each other. So, all organisms in an ecosystem or habitat rely on each other. Okay? Now this is because they rely on each other for food. They rely on each other because you have this predator-prey relationships. You have relationships where one organism eats another. Now just to make sure you understand, a predator and a prey. So the predator is an organism that eats other animals. So an organism that eats animals, and a prey species is an animal or an organism that gets eaten. Okay, so it's an organism that gets eaten. Now the relationships within a ecosystem between animals and in who eats who is dynamic. It's very rare. Think of yourselves, you don't just eat one type of meat and if that type of meat runs out you'll die. You eat different types of meats depending on what's available. Okay? Now, another word that seems to throw people is this trophic levels. So trophic levels. I like to think of the word troph. If you think about when we spoke about autotrophs and heterotrophs, I like to think of this word as to eat. And levels is simply a stage up. Okay? So trophic levels are simply stages in a food chain. Stages in a food chain. Now, rather than you have to put up with my wonderful drawings, what I've done is I've pre-prepared some pictures out of a textbook that I own, and I thought I'd just drop them in here. Okay, so if we have a look at an example of a food chain. So this is an example of a food chain. We've got a organism, grass. Remember, grass is a plant. Plants are living things, so it's an organism which is eaten by the rabbit, which in turn is eaten by the fox. Okay? These are different trophic levels. Each one of these organisms represents a different trophic level. So the grass would be in the first trophic level, the rabbit would be in the second trophic level, and the fox would be in the third trophic level. Okay? As we move up, we go to different levels in a food chain of what eats what. Okay? Now, these organisms will be given very special terms. Okay? The first one is the grass. The grass is the first stage in this food chain, and all food chains that we know of start with a plant. Okay? So these are known as the producer. The producer. They're known as the producer because they are autotrophic. Sorry, they're autotrophic. And what this means is they make their own food. So plants photosynthesize, so they are autotrophic. Okay, so these make their own food. So make their own food. Okay, so we've got the producer, which is autotrophic. It's a plant. It produces its own food. It makes its own food. It is autotrophic. Okay, the important thing here, and we'll put it in red again, is that all food chains start with a producer. Now, producers catch energy from the sun. So, if we were to add to this diagram, we could draw the sun, like so. Wonderful drawing, I know, I think you'll agree. We've got the sun, which puts its light down onto the grass, which is the first trophic level in this food chain. It's then eaten by the rabbit. Now, in this food chain, the rabbit would be known as the primary consumer. The primary consumer. Okay? Now, the primary consumer is heterotrophic. It eats the grass. Okay? So it is heterotrophic. It eats the grass. It eats other organisms. So heterotrophic means it eats other organisms. Okay? Now, the primary consumer is always a herbivore. It eats the producer. So the primary consumer is a herbivore. Now, herbivores are organisms that only eat plants. They only eat herbs. Okay? Herbivore, they only eat plants. So, where can we fit this on? A herbivore only eats plants. So, they only eat plants. Okay? Now, we've got the sun, which is giving energy to the grass, which is doing photosynthesis because it's an autotroph to make their own food, to generate energy. They then get eaten by the primary consumer, which in this case is the rabbit at the second trophic level. And then the rabbit is eaten by the organism in the third trophic level, which is a fox. Okay? And in this food chain, we would call the fox the secondary consumer. So the fox, it's not the best colour pen to use. Will we see grey? Okay, so the fox is the secondary consumer. Okay, now these are always, again, heterotrophs. They eat other organisms, so they are heterotrophs. But this time, they are often omnivores, okay, or sometimes carnivores. So these can either be carnivores or omnivores. Okay, these can't be herbivores because they always eat other animals. So just to define those two words for you, a carnivore, a carnivore is an animal that only eats meat, doesn't eat plant material, so only eats meat, whereas an omnivore eats both plants and meat. So omnivore eats both plants and meat. So eats both plants and meat. Okay? So these organisms all interdepend on each other. If there was no grass, the rabbit would not have anything to eat, therefore it would die out, and if the rabbit dies out, the fox will have very little to eat, and therefore that will die out. This is what we mean by interdependence. The fox is a predator because it eats other animals, whereas the rabbit is a prey. Each one of these represent a trophic level in this food chain. So at trophic level 1 is the grass, trophic level 2 is the rabbit, and trophic level 3 is the fox. The grass is said to be a producer. It is an autotroph. It makes its own food, and all food chains start with a producer. At the first trophic level of any food chain, you will have organisms that are producers. They're autotrophic. Then the primary consumer eats the producer. The primary consumer is therefore heterotrophic. It eats other organisms. And the primary consumer is a herbivore, or could be an omnivore, okay? So, or they could be a omnivore. The secondary consumer, then eats the primary consumer, and these are either carnivores or omnivores, and they are heterotrophic, okay? So, something that you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about trophic levels is a bit of a physics term, but really we need to keep it in mind, is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. This is something you need to keep in mind. This is something that is really important. Okay, it's important purely because if we could create our own energy, we wouldn't need food chains. The whole point of a food chain is to pass energy from the sun all the way up to the fox, to the secondary consumer, and sometimes the tertiary consumer. Okay? So energy in the form of light leaves the sun. It's then captured by the grass, where it's turned into chemical energy. The chemical energy is then passed on through chemical energy to the rabbit, and then from the rabbit to the fox. Okay? So we get this chemical energy passed up through the food chain. So energy is passed up a food chain. Okay? So energy is passed from the sun up a food chain. So let's have a look at a different food chain so that we can demonstrate this idea a bit more. If we turn the screen black, which one shall we use this time? We'll use... let's use this one because it's got more stages in it. Okay, so if we zoom in, what we've got here is a food chain for birds, okay, which may be found in a forest of some sort. So as we said before, you'll always start with the sun. So you've got the sun in the sky, and we've got our primary consumer, which is a producer, an autotroph, which is converting the sun's energy into chemical energy as oak leaves. Okay, so we've got our primary consumer. We've then got we've got our producer even. We've got our producer. We've then got our primary consumer, we've got our secondary consumer, and then we've got our tertiary consumer, which is the third consumer, and then you would have your quaternary consumer. Okay, but energy is passed from the sun to the oak leaves, and the oak leaves use some of this energy to grow. Okay, so if we were to draw, or if I was to attempt to draw one of these oak leaves, so they sort of go like so, don't they? Okay, not the best drawing in the world, but you get the idea. We've got an oak leaf. Okay, so we've got our oak leaf. And we've said that the sun hits the leaf, and because the leaf is autotrophic, it can turn the sun's light into chemical energy. Okay, so it hits the leaf, and then the leaf turns the sun's light into chemical energy. So we've got some chemical energy. Okay, now this chemical energy can be used mainly to grow new plant in order for the plant to get bigger. So the chemical energy is used by the plant to grow. Okay, so some of the energy that hits the plant is used to grow. Some of the energy that hits the plant is given off as heat from respiration. Okay, so some of this energy is lost to the environment by heat. So some energy is lost as heat to the environment. So we've got a plant where this energy from the sun hits the leaf, and the leaf, through doing photosynthesis, converts light energy into chemical energy. This chemical energy is used by the plant to grow, to get bigger, to build new cells. Some of the energy that hits the plant is lost in the form of heat. Okay, so not all of the energy from the sun is used to grow new plants. Now, if the slug then comes along, and we're going to draw a slug, so if the slug then comes along, so that's its bottom half, that's its head, and that's its body, and we've got its little antennas like this, and we've got our slug. Okay, some of the chemical energy stored in the plant is passed to the slug. Okay, so when the slug eats the plant through eating, it's a heterotroph, the chemical energy that has been stored in the plant that is used by the plant to grow is passed to the slug. Okay, and again, some of that chemical energy is stored for the slug to grow. So the slug has now got chemical energy inside of it. Some chemical energy is used by the slug for growth. Okay? Again, some of the energy is lost to the surroundings through heat. Okay? When the slug respires, it loses some of the energy to the environment. Then, because the slug is an animal, it will also lose some energy through excretion, through having a wee and having a poo. So some of the energy is lost through urine and feces. This is because the energy that is used by the slugs, some of this energy is trapped in the urine and the feces. Okay? So the point I'm trying to make is that yes, we do have food chains with trophic levels. We have energy from the sun being passed to the oat leaves. The oat leaves convert the sun's energy into chemical energy. Some of this chemical energy is used by the plant to grow, whereas some of it is lost into the environment as heat. Then when the slug comes along, when the primary consumer, the slug comes along, it eats the plant, but it can only get the energy that has been stored in the plant. It can't get this energy that's been lost. And then this slug then uses that energy it's eaten to grow new parts for the slug in order to grow. But not all of the energy it eats is used for growth. Some of it's lost to the environment through respiration, and some of it is lost through urine and feces. Okay? Now, when we're talking about this sort of thing, you'll often see a term brandished about, a term spoken about called biomass. Biomass. Now, biomass, if we break it down, bio means living, and mass means how heavy something is. So mass means how heavy. Okay? So biomass we can therefore define as how heavy, or the amount of living material in a plant, or in an animal, sorry, not a plant, because I was looking at the oak leaf, in an organism. Now, in the plant, we could therefore say that the chemical energy it makes from the sun, some of it is used to grow and build new biomass. Again, we could say the same for the slug. Is used by the slug for growth and build new biomass. Okay? So, biomass is the amount of living material in an organism. It's when we weigh an organism and we take out the water. We don't weigh the water. We only weigh what is actually part of the organism. Now, we could then have the thrush eat the slug. That will only get the energy that's been stored as new biomass. And again, the thrush will lose some energy as heat, and it will also have a poo in a way and lose some energy. And they also lose energy through movement, through things like that. Okay? So, if we think about biomass, because you may be needed to draw what's known as a pyramid of biomass. So if I start to wipe the board and we blacken everything up again so you can see, if we put biomass, so we can say the amount of living material in an organism. Now, you could be asked to draw what's known as a pyramid of biomass, and this is where you need to use a food chain, okay, and look at trophic levels in order to build a pyramid of biomass. So the food chain I'm going to use is this chain. We've got some dead leaves off plants, so the leaves have died but they already have some energy stored in them. The woodlouse eats the leaves and the blackbird eats the woodlouse. Okay, so for all intents and purposes of this, we've got our producer, we've got our primary consumer, and we've got our secondary consumer. You may be asked to draw a pyramid of biomass. Okay, now one rule with a pyramid of biomass. So we can say a pyramid of biomass always has a pyramid shape. So if you are given a multiple choice question where it says which one of these shows a pyramid of biomass, you are looking for the one that has a big base and then gets thinner as it gets to the top. Sometimes you may be asked about a pyramid of number. Now a pyramid of number is not always a pyramid shape. Okay? So if we were to look at this as a pyramid of biomass, okay? I'm going to use green for the first one. So if we look at our producer, the dead leaves, you're always going to have the biggest bar at the bottom. In a pyramid of biomass, in any food chain, there'll always be producers which produce the most biomass, okay? Because one woodlouse will eat a lot of leaves. So this would be our dead leaves. Okay, these are our dead leaves. We would then move on to our primary consumer. Okay, and this would often be a little bit smaller. So may look like this, your wood louse. Okay, and then finally we'll have our blackbird, but we might only have one blackbird that eats about 50 woodlouse, so the blackbird bar may only be about that big. Okay, now this is what we would call a pyramid of biomass. The bottom bar always shows the producer and the top bar always shows the final consumer. So we could say that as you go from the bottom, we go up the food chain. So we move up trophic levels from the bottom to the top. Okay? Now, as we move up, we can also say remember, some energy is lost to the environment, some is lost through wee and poo. We can say that as you move up a trophic level, energy decreases. So, as we move up a pyramid of biomass, energy decreases. Okay? Now, because there is not much energy being passed up, you very rarely see a food chain that is more than 4 or 5 steps. Because by the time you get to this top where the blackbird is, there wouldn't be a lot of energy left. Therefore, the organism wouldn't survive. So food chains are only usually about 4 or 5 steps long. However, you may not you never have just a simple food chain like this. What you'll often have is something called a food web. Okay, a food web looks a bit like this. I'm just gonna quickly zoom this in. This shows all of the feeding relationships, all of the interdependence within an ecosystem. So, for example, we've got two producers. We've got the oak leaves and we've got the grass. We've also got three primary consumers. Four primary consumers. 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got a hedgehog, which eats both earthworms and snails. We've got a weasel, which eats rabbits and voles. The vole is also eaten by an owl, and the fox eats hedgehogs, weasels, and rabbits. Now, this is known as interdependency. Okay? Oftentimes, you'll be asked a question where, for example, it may say, what will happen in an ecosystem if all of a sudden the number of voles decreases? Okay? Now, a lot of people fall into the trap of just saying, well, the number of weasels will go down. But this is not just the case, sorry. Weasels may go down, but not necessarily, because there are still rabbits for the weasel to eat. At the same time, the number of earthworms and snails may go up, because earthworms and snails have more food to themselves. They don't have to compete with the voles. And if the number of earthworms and snails go up, the number of hedgehogs will go up. And if the number of hedgehogs go up, the number of foxes will go up. If the number of foxes go up, they have more food to eat, and therefore they don't have to rely on the weasel, which may or may not have gone down due to the vole dying. When you think about a food web, look at all the relationships and always mention interdependency. Don't just say they're related to each other. So we can say always mention interdependency. Always mention interdependency in your answers. Okay? So, if we have a look at our first slide, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video. I'd like you to either discuss with a friend or with a piece of paper, have a go at answering these questions, and then we'll discuss them in a moment after I've had a drink. Okay then. So, hopefully you've had a go at those questions. The first one says, identify two ways that energy is transferred from an animal to the environment. So you've got 1 mark for saying that it's transferred as chemical energy in feces and urine, and another mark for saying that it's transferred as heat from respiration. So 1 mark for saying it's transferred as for urine and feces as chemical energy, another mark for saying it's transferred as heat in respiration. Second question says, identify one way that energy is transferred to a plant from the environment. Then you needed to say, as light energy from the sun. So plants get the light energy from the sun. Next question, which is a grade A star, 3 marks. It has been suggested that food chains in tropical rainforests contain more trophic levels than those in temperate areas like the UK because rainforests receive more light energy. Explain the reasoning behind this suggestion. So if I just read out the mark scheme to you, it says, if more energy enters the system as light energy, converted into chemical energy by plants. So there's more light energy, therefore the plants make more chemical energy, 1 mark. If this was the case, then there will be more energy in every trophic level of a food chain. Okay, so if the plants make more energy, the primary consumer gets more energy when it eats it, and therefore the secondary consumer will get more energy, and so on and so forth. Second mark. Third mark comes from saying, so there may be enough energy in the tropical trophic level equivalent to the top temperature trophic level to support the higher trophic level, producing a longer food chain. So essentially, what it's saying is if you have got the plant, which is then passing the energy onto the primary consumer, which is then passing it on to the secondary consumer, if this one is making more energy, it can pass more energy onto this one. Then if this one's making more energy, it can pass more energy onto this one. Therefore, there is more likely to be a tertiary consumer, which gets more energy, and therefore that one gets more energy, which can pass onto a quaternary consumer. Okay? And if this one's got more energy, there could be another one to eat it. But usually, by the time you get up to the tertiary consumer, there's not a lot of energy left. So there isn't a quaternary consumer. It won't get any energy from eating that organism. Hopefully, that question made a bit of sense. Okay, hopefully it helped. So, if we exit and we go on to here, and we clear the screen. So, you need to know about parasitism and mutualism, okay? Now, you need to know what a parasite is. So, a parasite is defined as an organism that feeds on a host while they are living together. So, a parasite is an organism that feeds on another organism while they are living, sorry about my handwriting, together, okay? Now, this other organism is often termed a host. A host. Now, a host is defined as an organism which a parasite feeds on. Okay? Now, this is different to a predator-prey relationship. This is different because they are living together. Therefore, both are still alive. So, both organisms are alive. Okay, so one feeds on the other, but they are still alive. It doesn't kill it, okay, but it can harm it, okay. The host may be harmed by the parasite. So hosts may be harmed, okay. Now, a good example of this would be a flea or a head louse. So, you could have fleas. I don't know how I can draw a flea, but here goes. Okay, you could have a flea, and the flea may live on a cat. Okay, so I'll do my best cat drawing, like so. Now, this would be a parasitic relationship because the flea is feeding on the cat, but the cat is not dying, okay? The cat is still alive, but the cat may be harmed by it. So we've got a cat and we've got the flea, okay? Now, fleas suck the cat's blood. They suck the cat's blood. This would be an example of a parasitic relationship. Another type of parasitic relationship is people who have tapeworms. So we can have tapeworms. That's my drawing of a tapeworm. And what happens is if you get tapeworms, they can live inside of you. So if I draw just a stickman, a tapeworm lives in the intestines of mammals, okay? It can live in an animal's intestines, and what it does is when you eat, it absorbs nutrients from digested food. So tapeworms absorb nutrients from digested food in an animal's intestines. Okay? So tapeworms live in the intestines of animals and they absorb nutrients that you eat. Another example it's not just limited to animals. You can also have mistletoe. Okay? Now mistletoe is that green, leafy, sort of spiky plant that people hold over each other at Christmas, and tradition is that if you hold the mistletoe above someone, they kiss you. Okay? But mistletoe grows roots into trees, and then it absorbs the water that the tree gets. So mistletoe, it grows roots into trees and absorbs the tree's water. These are all parasites. They all feed on other organisms without killing them. Okay? Now this is slightly different to mutualists. This is slightly different to mutualists or mutualism. Okay? Now mutualists are defined as organisms that live together, organisms that live together where both benefit. So both benefit from the relationship. Okay? You may have seen on the TV or National Geographic that there are certain sharks, or in fact if ever you've watched Finding Nemo, you'll have certainly seen that there are sharks that live, or whales. This is the worst drawing of a shark ever, but you get the idea. So this is a shark. There are sharks which have cleaner fish that follow them. They have fish that swim closely to them. They swim right beside them. And what the cleaner fish do is they get rid of any bacteria, and as their name suggests, they clean the shark. So these are cleaner fish. Okay, they clean the shark, but the shark gets clean and the fish get food by cleaning the shark. They eat whatever bits of debris are on the shark. So we can say that the shark gets clean and the cleaner fish get food. So this is a mutualistic relationship. They live together and they both benefit. Okay? Now, another example, which I've certainly spoken about with people who do A-level with me, is I live with my cats. I have quite a few cats. I just want an excuse to draw a cat again, to be honest with you. I live with my cats. By living with me, my cats get food, and by allowing them to live with me, I get to stroke them or play with them whenever I want. I get love and affection from them. So we can say, Mr. Abraham gets affection from his cats and his cats get food. This would be a mutualistic relationship because we're both living organisms. I'm a human, they are cats, and we get things from each other. It's mutualistic. We live together and we both benefit. So, if we were to look at this as an example, it says an example question you could get is that some tube worm species that live near deep sea vents have no mouth but contain chemosynthetic bacteria. Explain how the relationship between worm and bacteria is mutualistic. Now, chemosynthetic or chemosynthesis, for those of you that didn't know, is the making of food using energy from chemicals. So like photosynthesis is using light to make energy. Chemosynthesis is using chemicals to make energy. They break down chemicals in order to make energy. Now the pupil has written, the tube worms benefit by getting food from the bacteria inside them. The bacteria benefit by being protected from the harsh environment around the vent. Therefore, the relationship is mutualistic. They're both getting something from this relationship. So, if you'd like to pause the video and discuss with someone next to you or write down some answers, when you start the video again in a moment, we'll go over what you've put. Right then, so question 1 says, define the term parasite. Usually says, a parasite is an organism that feeds on and causes harm to a host without killing it. So they feed on a host, they can cause it harm, but they do not kill it. Question 2 says, explain what is meant by mutualism. So mutualism is when two organisms both benefit from living together, from a relationship. So when both organisms benefit from a relationship. Question 3, which is grades D to B, explain how the relationship between nitrogen-fixing bacteria and legumes is mutualistic. Okay, now you may have needed to go away and Google this one, but the bacteria benefit from getting food from the plant. Okay, they get food from the plant and the plant protects them. So basically the bacteria live inside legumes. They live on their roots. Okay, so the bacteria get food and protection from the environment, whereas the legumes benefit by being able to get nitrogen out of the soil in order to use in the plant. So you have basically you have some soil with a legume inside, okay, and then the bacteria live on the roots of the legume, and what they usually do is the nitrogen that's in the soil is converted by the bacteria so that the plant can use it, and the bacteria are protected from the environment and they get food from the plant in order to do this. So the bacteria convert nitrogen in the soil so that the plants can use it as nitrates. Okay? So. Last two parts for this video. So we've got this, then we'll do a couple of questions, then another part, then a couple of questions, and then we are done. So this next part, we need to talk about pollution, okay? Now, pollution is a massive problem to the global community in 2017. So pollution is a global problem. Is a global problem. Okay? As the number of people increase, the amount of pollution also increases. So as the global population increases, so does the amount of pollution. Now, this is because we're using more cars, we're using more electricity, so electricity has to be generated from fossil fuels. We're going into more work, we're doing more factory things, we're, creating more waste, and therefore it is increasing. Okay? Now, a pollutant, so pollutant is a substance that causes damage to the environment. So, a substance that causes damage to the environment. Okay? Now, two examples of pollutants would be sulfur dioxide, and phosphates and nitrates. So phosphates and nitrates. Okay? Now, sulfur dioxide is released from factories and pollutes the air. So this is released from factories and it pollutes the air. It pollutes air. Okay? Whereas phosphates and nitrates are released from sewerage and from fertilizers. So, released from sewerage and fertilizers, which we will look at in the next video. Or we might, now we're going to look at it in a moment, eutrophication. It's released from sewerage and fertilizers and goes into the water. It pollutes water. Okay? Now, as I just said, because I got a little bit confused about where I was and whatnot, this can cause something called eutrophication. Eutrophication. So, eutrophication. Okay? Eutrophication is a process where fertilizers, so a process where fertilizers are released into streams, killing all organisms due to plant growth. Now, let me just explain what actually happens. So I need to get a dark space, so I'm going to get rid of these for the time being. I've just used a paintbrush so that you can obviously still see where it is, but that doesn't matter. So, I want you to imagine that we've got a river, okay? And fertilizers from some farmland, so fertilizers are released into the river, okay? So this is our river. Now, when these fertilizers are released into the river, they cause algae to grow really quickly. So you may have only had a couple of dots of algae in the river to begin with, but due to the addition of these fertilizers, because fertilizers are added to the river, they grow really, really quickly and they cover the top layer of the river. Okay? This top layer of algae, so in fact we'll label this. This is your algae. This top layer of algae stops light from being able to get to the bottom of the river. Okay? Therefore, the plants found at the bottom of the river die. Okay? So the plants at the bottom of the river die. Plants die at bottom. So, just to recap, fertilizers have been released into the river. These fertilizers have caused algae on top of the river to grow really quickly. This causes a layer of algae which the light cannot get through. Because the light can't get through the algae, no light gets to the bottom of the river, and therefore the plants at the bottom of the river die. Okay? These plants that have died are then broken down by bacteria. The bacteria break down the plants dead at the bottom of the river. So bacteria break down dead plants at the bottom of the river. As they do this, they take all of the oxygen out of the water. Now, because there's no oxygen left in the water, this means that the fish found in the river start to die. Okay? So just to recap, this is eutrophication. Fertilizers are added to the river through pollution. This causes algae to grow very quickly. They cause a thick layer on top of the water. This thick layer on top of the water prevents light from being able to get to plants at the bottom. These plants die at the bottom of the river as a result. When they die, the bacteria at the bottom of the river start to break them down. As they start to break down the plants, they suck all of the oxygen out of the water. Therefore, all the other fish and plants die. And what you're left with is sort of like barren water. There's no life there. So, if we have a look at a worked example first, I do not know what I've done, so we don't want to do that. We just want to look at it like this. This is a worked example. It says, the graph shows the best estimate of the number of people in the world since 1950 and 3 predictions of population size in 2050. Analyse and interpret the graph. So this graph is saying that in 1950 the population was about what? About 2,500? Yep, 2,500 million. Whereas now, in about 20, so that would be 2020, 15, 20, 25. So this is 2015. They're saying that the population size is roughly about 7,500 million. Okay, so it's more than doubled. Now, if we look, it says that all death rates stay the same. They're no different. If the birth rate is the same as in 2000, it will continue to increase. If it's a little lower, it will start to level off. And if it's less, it will start to drop. So the pupil has said, the graph shows that human population size has risen since 1950 from about 2,500 million to nearly 7,000 million now. The 3 different estimates of population size depend on differences in possible birth rates. The high and medium estimates show population size will continue to rise, which is these 2. They'll show that they continue to rise. And the low estimate shows that it will level out at about 7,500 million and then start to fall, which it certainly does. They have described the graph quite well. They've interpreted it as well. They've read what these parts mean and they've described what's going to happen. So, what I would like you to do, I'd like you to pause the video. I'd like you to have a go at these questions. We'll go over the answers, then we'll do the final part, and then it'll be the end of this video. So, hopefully you've had a go at those questions. The first one says, explain how eutrophication might cause fish to die. So, you should have said, for that question, that you've got your river, fertilizers are added. This causes algae to grow on top of the river. So you've got your algae growing. This means that light can no longer penetrate. Plants at the bottom of the river die. So your plants die. This allows bacteria to grow on them. And then the fish die because there's no oxygen left in the river. So 1 mark for saying eutrophication causes algae to grow on the top of the river. 1 mark. 2nd mark for saying this stops light penetrating the river and therefore plants at the bottom of the river die. So 2nd mark for saying light cannot penetrate the top layer of the river and therefore plants at the bottom of the river die. 3rd mark for saying that the bacteria start to decay the dead plants at the bottom of the river and suck oxygen out of the water. So 3rd mark for saying that the bacteria start to break down the dead plants at the bottom of the river and suck oxygen out of the water as they do that. And fourth mark for saying no oxygen means that the fish die. So I'll quickly run through those 4 marks again. Eutrophication is the growth of algae on the top of a river, 1 mark. Second mark for saying light cannot penetrate the algae, therefore plants at the bottom of the river die. Third mark for saying the bacteria at the bottom of the river start to break down the dead plants and suck oxygen out of the water at the same time. And fourth mark for saying this leaves no oxygen for the fish and they die. Okay. Next question. It says, discuss the statement, over the next 50 years, the world will become more populated. So, you could have had one of 2 arguments really. You could have said that the human population is likely to increase, therefore human activities will produce more pollution. So as the number of people increase, there will be more pollution produced. There's 2 marks. Therefore, we need to develop ways of reducing pollution, and there may be other factors in the future that we don't know about now. So 1 mark for saying the population is increasing. Second mark for saying an increase in the population means more pollution will be produced. And third mark for saying we're not sure how things will play out in the future, and therefore we need to safeguard against any changes in the future. Okay, final part of this video. So let's clear the board. Right then. So we've just said that pollution is a big problem, and we need to be able to monitor pollution, global pollution. Okay. Now, in biology, we use something called indicator species. Indicator species. Okay? Now, indicator species are species which can be used to tell us about the conditions of an environment. For example, so e.g., how polluted an area is. Okay? So, for example, there may be a species that is only found when it's non-polluted, when it's clean. So, the species may only be found where there is no pollution, or they may be found, or they may be able to tolerate high levels of pollution. So they may be able to tolerate high pollution. So you could go to an area and you may see that there is a certain species there, and therefore you can say there mustn't be any pollution because this species can only survive in areas where there's no pollution. On the other hand, you may go somewhere and you may see a species but no other species, and you may say, well, this is the only species that could live in areas with high sulfur dioxide. Therefore, we can assume that this area has a lot of sulfur dioxide. Okay? Now, there's a few different species of indicator species EdExcel want you to know about, okay? First of all is lichen. Lichen. Okay? Now, lichen are a combination of algae and fungus. Okay? They live together in a mutualistic relationship. So, lichen are a mix of algae and fungus. So they live together in a mutualistic relationship. Okay? Now, lichen can only grow where there is no pollution. Okay? So they only grow where there is no pollution. Okay? They only grow in areas where there is no pollution. So if you see a certain species of lichen growing in an area, you know there's no pollution. But there are other species which grow in areas of high pollution. If ever you are asked about lichen, you will always be told about the species that they're asking about. So some only grow in areas where there's no pollution. Others grow in high pollution. If you have a look at the exam questions I've sent you, I'll try and put a question in about lichen, and you'll be able to see, they may say one species grows in this area, another species grows in this one. One likes this, one likes the other, okay? But you'll see the difference between the two, okay? Now, the other one you need to know about, is bloodworm. Now, bloodworm only grow in water that contains little oxygen. So, live in areas with little oxygen. So they live in polluted areas. Okay? They live in polluted areas. So if you see bloodworm in a river, you know that that water is polluted. Another one that you need to know about are stonefly larvae and freshwater shrimps. So the third one are stonefly larvae and freshwater shrimps. Okay? Now, as you can pretty much guess from the freshwater shrimp's name, they live, so these live in water with lots of oxygen. So they only live in non-polluted areas. So they live in non-polluted areas. Okay? And the final one that you need to know about, that EdExcel specifically says you need to know about, are black spot. Black spot. Now, black spot are fungus that live on roses, okay? They infect roses. Now, the fungus cannot survive in areas with sulfur dioxide in it. So, wherever you find these, there is no air pollution. So, black spot live on roses where there is no sulfur dioxide, and therefore they can only live in areas with clean air. So they can only live in areas with clean air. So they cannot live in areas where there is pollution. So indicator species are species which we can look at to tell what an environment is like. So you may find some of them where there is no pollution, or you may find some of them where there's lots of pollution. For example, black spot. They're a fungus which lives on roses, and they cannot survive if there is sulfur dioxide. Therefore, if we go to an area and there's black spot on the roses, we can tell that the air must be clean. There's no sulfur dioxide in the air. Stonefly larvae and freshwater shrimps, we can go to a stream or a river, and if we see either of these two, stonefly larvae or freshwater shrimps, we know that the water is clean, it's non-polluted, because they can only live in water with lots of oxygen. On the other hand, bloodworm, they live in areas in water with very little oxygen. So if we go to a river or a stream and we see there's bloodworm there, we know that the water's polluted. Lichen are a mixture of algae and fungus, and it depends on the species whether they live in a polluted area or a non-polluted area. So, final two parts. Explain how recycling metals, paper and plastics can reduce the amount of landfill and conserve resources. The pupil has said when metals such as steel and aluminium are recycled, less metal ore has to be extracted from the ground. For most metals, less energy is needed to recycle than to produce new metal from its ore, so it saves resources. When paper is recycled to make paper or cardboard, this means that trees do not have to be cut down to make new paper. It also takes less energy to recycle the paper than to make new. Okay? So usually think it's better to recycle because it takes less energy than it would to make new. Okay? And it says in the exam alert there, saying that recycling is better for the environment is not enough. You have to link recycling to save energy and conserving resources. Okay, so always say that by recycling you save energy and you conserve natural resources. Final one for this video, and then we can stop. If you want to pause the video and have a go at these questions, we'll come back together in a moment and go over the answers. Okay, so question 1 says, explain how each of these species acts as a pollution indicator species. So stonefly larvae can only live in water that contains lots of oxygen, 1 mark. Therefore, they are indicators of unpolluted water, 2nd mark. So 1 mark for saying they live in water with lots of oxygen, 2nd mark for saying they live in unpolluted water. Black spot on roses. Black spot can only live in air with no sulfur dioxide, 1 mark. So black spot can only live in air with no sulfur dioxide, therefore they are an indicator of no air pollution. Second question, Describe two benefits to the environment of recycling materials. So you will conserve resources and less energy is needed to recycle than to make new. So 1 mark for saying you will conserve natural resources. Second mark for saying less energy is needed to recycle than there is needed to make new. Third question, which is a grade C to A. Evidence from pollution indicators can be used to locate the source of pollution. Explain what evidence would be needed for this. Okay, so if we think it's asking about pollution indicators, so we need to make reference to that. So you could say that samples from above and below a source of pollution will show different indicator organisms present. So for example, if you've got a river and you want to know if the factory found at position X is causing pollution, and you know that the water of the river runs this way from right to left, if you find that there's lots of bloodworm in this river, in this part of the river, you know that this is polluted water. But if you find lots of stonefly larvae up here, you know that this river is clean. Therefore, the pollution must be being released by the factory. So you can say samples from above and below a source of pollution will show different indicator species, 1 mark. So above and below a source of pollution, different indicator species will be found. Organisms such as stonefly and freshwater shrimps will be found in non-polluted water, and organisms such as bloodworm would be found in the polluted water. So 1 mark for saying you'd look for indicator species both upstream and downstream from the suspected site of pollution. If you find stonefly larvae and freshwater shrimps, the water is clean. If you find bloodworm, it's dirty. Okay? So I hope this video has been of help. We should only have 1 more video and then we will move on to chemistry after the next video. The next video should be a short one. We only need to do the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. Please make sure you're completing the revision cards that come with these videos, and please make sure you're having a go at the exam questions, as your B1 exam is very, very close. Okay, thank you for watching.